Hi, I'm Loretta, and I'm really glad that you showed up today. Welcome to my sewing room. So today what we're going to be doing is piecing together the first month's packet of the Alaska Block of the Month by Laundry Basket Quilts. And this is a finished block 1. You're going to be making 4 of these, and this is what it's going to look like when we're done. So I'm going to meet you over at the sewing machine and we'll get started. So here we are at the sewing machine, and I've just matched up 2 of those triangles right sides together, matched up along the raw edge, and we're doing a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance on these particular pieces. These are laser cut, and so the sizes are very, very precise. And one of the reasons you have to take a nice scant 1/4 inch seam allowance is that you have to account for a couple of things, one being the thickness of the thread and the other being the fold of the fabric. So by taking this 1/4 inch scant seam allowance, you're accounting for those 2 things. So now I'm just going to continue piecing these together, and when I get them all done, we'll get them pressed and go on to the next step. One thing you are going to want to figure out is where the scant 1/4 inch is on your sewing machine. I have a line on the bed of my machine, and what I have found is that if I can see that line, I am getting a good scant 1/4 inch. So that's how I figured it out on my machine. If you'll watch my 1/4 inch video, you'll get some good tips about how to do a good 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'll try to link that below in the description box. So now I have the first part of Unit A, and I'm going to add the small triangle in the little pink square polka dot. So that is going to go at the top of this lavender pansy fabric. So I'll flip it down on top of that, match up the raw edges. This side up here, it's gonna match pretty well. And on this other leading end, if you turn it over, you can see that the small light triangle is gonna hang out just a little bit on this edge right here. So don't worry about that. It will all fit together properly in the end. So line up the raw edges. Again, I've started with a scrap of fabric, and again I'm going to take a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. And throughout this tutorial, I won't be showing any of the pattern instructions, and I won't be doing any cutting because the pieces are all pre-cut. So basically I'm just going to try to give you some tips and tricks as you're piecing along each month. And the reason I don't use pins is I feel like they distort the fabric too much. I use them, when it's critical to get a matching point, but I don't really like using pins unless I have to. The one thing I noticed with this light colored sort of polka dotted fabric is it's kind of hard to tell sometimes the right side from the wrong side, so I have to be careful when I'm putting these down that I'm actually getting them right sides together. So I'm going to continue piecing these. And we'll get them all pressed, and then we'll have some completed units of Unit A of Block 1. Okay, so now we have the pieced Unit A's. You should have 8 of these now. I will show you, I'm pressing my seams open on the back with blocks like this, quilts like this, where there's lots of different pieces. All the blocks are not the same. There's seam allowances going in all different directions. I like to press my seams open. I feel like it makes for a flatter finished quilt in the end. So now we have all of the Unit A blocks done. And there's going to be 2 of those in each of the finished Block 1. Now we're going to make Unit B, which is going to consist of 1 dark triangle and 1 triangle like this. And then you're going to have a beige small triangle that sits on top of this dark one. And this is not the same as the other light colored triangles. This is the sort of more beige tone-on-tone print. So these, you're only going to have 4 of them. There's only 1 for each block. I'm going to piece it in the same way, beginning with a scrap of fabric. I always start at the larger end and sew to the smaller end of this triangle. End up with a nicer looking, less stretching on this bias edge. Okay, we'll get these pressed and come back and add the lighter triangle to the top, just like we did before. Okay, I'm ready to start adding the light colored triangles to the top edge of the dark triangle. And there is a finished Unit B, and you're going to make 4 of these in total, 1 for each block. Now we'll move on to Unit C, and Unit C has this, the light purple again, and the light colored polka dot fabric, and that goes on top of this block. So this is what your finished Unit C is going to look like. So we're going to also piece 4 of those, and then once we're done with that, we'll put the whole thing together. One thing I suggest each month also is to use your provided templates and go ahead and make a practice block just to make sure that your finished block ends up at the correct dimensions and that your seam allowances are correct. And if your block does not end up at the right dimension, then you'll need to make some adjustments somewhere. I also have a video about how to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you might find that helpful as well. So we'll get these done, pressed up, and then I'll come back and we'll assemble a finished block 1. Now I'm going to add the small triangles. And there is a finished Unit C. And again, I pressed all my seams open on the back. A note about pressing, I use a hot, dry iron. I don't use steam. I occasionally will use a very light mist of water from a misting bottle. But because of all these bias edges, using steam, you run the risk of having some stretching on those bias edges. So I prefer to not use steam unless I feel like I need to for some reason. So now what we're going to do is put it all together. So I'm going to piece these 2 blocks together, and you can see here's the top left corner and the top right corner of the block. This is the halfway mark. And so these are easy to line up because you're going to just line up these 90-degree angles here. And that's where you're going to start your sewing. Just line up all your raw edges. And start sewing again using that scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. The other half of the block is going to have the dark piece to the right and the lighter piece, piece A, on the left. So you're going to match this purple pansy to this lighter floral. So those are going to go right sides together. Again, you're going to start sewing at this 90-degree corner up here, matching all your raw edges. And again, scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. And like I've mentioned before, I do stop occasionally and let my presser foot lift, and that takes the pressure off the fabric, lets these two pieces relax against each other, prevents puckering, and gives you a much smoother, straighter seam allowance. And at the end, I like to use my stiletto to just hold everything together. So I've just got one block here that I've pieced the two halves together. I'll get these pressed and we'll get those sewn together and we'll have a finished block. Okay, now we have our two halves. Those are going to get put together. I'm going to use a clip actually to clip this center. Match those seams up and get that center held together. And then you're just going to match up all of your raw edges. And again, using a scant quarter-inch seam allowance. I'm going to adjust these layers just a little bit. I have a tiny little bit of stretching on that top piece. And I have my machine speed slowed down quite a bit, so I don't want to rush this. Double check that matching point there and use my stiletto. And now I'm going to line up the second half of this seam. And again, making sure that I've got a scant quarter. Okay, I'll get this pressed and then I will clear a spot on my cutting table so I can show you the finished block. And there we have it, a finished block A. You will have 4 of these blocks when you're done with this month's Block of the Month package. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you some good tips and tricks to help you accomplish this. I'm really pleased with how this block came out. I have nicely matched points in the center and it comes out to the correct size. So thank you very much for joining me today, and I'll see you next month. I do plan on posting a video in the next couple of weeks about what I've been up to for the past year. I've started some new ventures in sewing, so I'm going to let you guys in on some of that, but that's part of the reason why I haven't posted in such a long time. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.